The Interstellar Academy was not an ordinary school. It was a place where the strongest cadets of the galaxy gathered, children of apex warriors, heirs of predator clans, and champions of ancient tribes. They came here to prove who deserved to stand at the top. Every corridor shook with loud voices. Every arena burned with pride and power. And yet, in the middle of the storm, there was one human cadet who never made a sound. She walked with soft steps, never pushing through the crowd, never shouting her name, never boasting about her world. While others bragged about their kills or their victories, she sat quietly at the edge of the hall. Her silence made her invisible at first, but soon it made her stand out. Whispers followed her everywhere. She's human, from the death world. Then why is she so weak? Humans talk about being dangerous. This one doesn't even fight back. Laughter grew louder each day. In the cafeteria, her tray was pushed aside. In training, her weapons were swapped with faulty ones. On the march fields, she was shoved to the back. At first, it was only small insults. Then it became open mockery. One reptilian cadet hissed, "Careful. Don't stand too close. She might start crying." Another cadet with armored skin growled, "No wonder humans hide on their little blue rock. They don't belong in a warrior's world." The human cadet said nothing. She lowered her head, tightened her grip on her gear, and continued her drills. To many, her silence was weakness. To her, it was control. But inside her chest, silence did not mean peace. It was like holding a burning coal in her palm. Painful, heavy, but hidden from the world. Every insult pressed the fire deeper into her. She did not scream. She did not strike back. But she remembered. The instructors noticed too. Some thought she would fail out soon. Others laughed with the cadets, saying humans were too soft for the academy. Only one old instructor, a scarred veteran, watched her differently. He remembered the battles where humans had stood against impossible odds. He leaned against the rail during training and whispered to himself, "Quiet humans are never harmless. They are storms waiting for the right wind." But no one believed him. The quiet cadet remained a target. During sparring matches, opponents attacked her harder than the rules allowed. They wanted to see her break. They wanted her to scream. She never gave them the satisfaction. She always stood back up. Even when her lip bled, even when her body shook, she rose in silence. That silence frustrated her bullies more than anything else. "Why won't she fight?" they demanded. "Why won't she snap?" What they didn't see was what she did in the shadows. Late at night, when the academy lights dimmed, she trained alone. She wrapped her fists and struck the padded wall again and again until her arms ached. She studied battle simulations until her eyes grew heavy. She memorized alien movements, their strengths, their weaknesses. No one noticed. No one cared. But she did not stop. Every night her silence hardened into something sharp. One evening, during a combat drill, she entered the arena with her practice blade. The holographic enemies appeared, charging at her. She moved with calm focus, dodging, striking when she could. She was not flashy, not loud, but steady. Yet the other cadets laughed from the sidelines. "Too slow. She fights like a civilian." Even the holograms could beat her. Their voices echoed louder than the clash of weapons. The human cadet paused for a moment. Her shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath. Her fingers clenched tighter around the blade. For a second, her eyes lifted sharp, cold, unreadable. Then she lowered her weapon and walked out in silence. The aliens cheered at what they thought was her defeat. But the old instructor leaned forward. He saw the fire flicker behind her eyes. He had seen it before in humans who fought wars they were never meant to survive. "They are calling something they cannot control," he muttered. The days that followed grew worse. Mockery became entertainment. Some cadets started betting on how long the human would last before she quit. They wanted to break her spirit. But she never quit. She trained harder. She grew sharper. Her silence was not weakness. It was patience. Every insult, every shove, every laugh was fuel. She let them believe she was fragile. She let them believe she was soft. But in truth, she was a fuse. And fuses always lead to explosions. For now, the academy laughed at the quiet cadet. They mocked her day and night. They thought they understood her silence. But one day soon, the galaxy would learn. Silence is not the absence of strength. It is the weight of rage, waiting to be unleashed. The days at the Interstellar Academy passed like a cycle of tests, drills, and competitions. For most cadets, it was a place to prove their power. For the human cadet, it was a cage filled with laughter at her expense. Everywhere she went, the whispers followed. In the corridors, aliens glanced at her and smirked. In the training halls, her name was spoken only as a joke. They called her fragile, dead weight, and mute prey. For them, her silence was weakness. For her, it was a shield. But the shield was tested every day. During one morning drill, cadets lined up to lift heavy graviton weights. The reptilian cadets roared as they hoisted blocks that shimmered with gravity fields. A predator-born alien held one above his head and snarled, showing sharp teeth. Then the human cadet stepped forward. She placed her hands on the block and lifted. Her muscles tightened, her arms shook, but slowly, she raised it. She did not scream. She did not show pain. She simply lifted. But before she could place it down, another cadet tapped the controls, increasing the weight tenfold. The block crashed to the ground, throwing her backward. The others burst out laughing. "She cannot even carry her own burden," one shouted. "Humans are prey animals," another added. "Even their bones are weak." The human cadet stood up silently, dust clinging to her uniform. She brushed it off, picked up her blade, and walked away. No words, no anger shown. The laughter only grew. During combat simulations, the mockery became crueler. When her holographic enemies appeared, some cadets hacked the system to spawn twice as many opponents for her. She fought steadily, cutting one down after another, but exhaustion slowed her. By the time she completed the drill, she was drenched in sweat, knees trembling. The aliens clapped, not in respect, but in mock applause. "Bravo, human! You can fight ghosts, but never real warriors." Their voices echoed like poison in the air. Even in the cafeteria, there was no escape. Once, she placed her tray down at a table. Before she could sit, two cadets slid the tray to the floor with their claws, spilling her food. The entire hall erupted in laughter as she picked up the pieces in silence. Her silence enraged them more than her defeat. They wanted her to break. They wanted her to shout, to cry, to fight back. But she refused to give them that satisfaction. Still, the fire inside her chest burned hotter with each insult. The old instructor, the one who had survived wars, kept watching. He saw the way her eyes hardened for a split second whenever the others mocked her. He saw her fists curl tight when she thought no one noticed. He saw how she never quit, never skipped drills, never left the hall early. "They do not understand," he whispered to himself one evening. "They are building a storm, but storms are quiet before they strike." The worst moment came during a sparring exercise. She was paired against a cadet from a predator race, tall and muscular with curved horns. The match was supposed to be practice, controlled strikes, no killing blows. But the predator cadet had other plans. As the fight began, he lunged at her with full force, his blade slashing fast. She blocked, dodged, barely keeping up. The other cadets laughed from the sidelines. "End it quick," they shouted. "Break her." The predator swung hard, knocking the blade from her hands. The weapon clattered across the floor. He stepped forward, pressing the tip of his blade against her throat. "Humans are prey," he growled, pressing harder until the metal grazed her skin. "And prey never survives." The hall roared with laughter, but the cadet did not move. She did not beg. She did not flinch. She only met his eyes with a stare so calm that it unsettled him for a heartbeat. Then the instructor called the fight to a stop. The predator cadet threw down his blade and walked away, still smirking. The human cadet picked up her weapon, bowed her head, and left the arena. That night, the academy was alive with noise. Cadets shouted stories of her humiliation, exaggerating every detail. Some called her the weakest human in the galaxy. Others joked that Earth must be ashamed to send her. But while they laughed, she trained. Alone in the dark training hall, she struck the dummies again and again until her knuckles bled. She pushed her body past exhaustion, every muscle burning. Each strike echoed through the empty room like a silent promise. She remembered every laugh, every insult, every shove. And deep inside, her silence grew heavier. The cadets thought they were destroying her. But in truth, they were feeding her rage, layer by layer, like adding fuel to a hidden fire. One day, that fire would no longer stay quiet. And when it burned, not one apex warrior in the class would stand unscathed. The academy buzzed with noise as another week of training began. For most cadets, it was excitement, new drills, new sparring sessions, new challenges to display strength. For the human cadet, it was another battlefield of insults. By now, the jokes had become routine. Every time she walked into the hall, someone whispered, "Here comes the fragile one." Every time she lifted a weapon, someone smirked, "Careful, don't drop it." She ignored them all. But inside, the fire in her chest burned hotter with each passing day. That morning, the instructors announced a combat simulation. Cadets would form groups and test their skills in a mixed environment: close combat, range tactics, and survival scenarios. It was meant to be teamwork training. But for the human cadet, it became something else. When the groups were called, she found herself surrounded by predator-born cadets, some of the loudest bullies in the academy. Their eyes glowed with mischief, their tusks and horns gleaming under the training lights. "Perfect," one of them hissed. "We finally get to see how the prey fights in the wild." "Or how fast she runs," another added. The simulation began. Holographic terrain shifted into a dense jungle filled with artificial fog. Energy creatures roamed the shadows, programmed to attack any cadet they saw. The team moved forward except for her. Instead of helping her, the others shoved her toward the front. "Bait," they called her. "Humans make good bait." She walked ahead in silence, scanning the fog. Every step echoed with their laughter behind her. When the first holographic beast lunged from the mist, she moved quickly, dodging, striking, and cutting it down. She breathed steady, focused, not seeking applause. But instead of recognition, more laughter followed. "Look at that swing, clumsy. She fights like she's protecting chickens, not warriors." The insults cut deeper than the beast's claws. Still, she said nothing. As the simulation went on, the group worked against her. They disabled her weapon mid-fight, tossed her into danger zones, and shouted false commands just to confuse her. By the time the exercise ended, she was scratched, bruised, and exhausted. The others walked out of the jungle simulation laughing loudly, not even acknowledging her effort. The instructors gave them average marks. No one cared about her struggle. That night, the predators didn't stop. In the cafeteria, one of them slammed her tray from the table, spilling her meal onto the floor. Another spat, "Earth's soldier eats from the ground like a beast." The hall roared with cruel laughter. For the first time, her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Her eyes flickered, not with tears, but with something sharper. For a moment, it looked as if she might finally strike. The air grew tense, the laughter pausing, waiting for her reaction. But then, she stood, picked up her tray, and walked away in silence. The predators burst into even louder laughter. "She will never fight back," they shouted. "Humans are cowards." The silence after their words followed her like a shadow back to her quarters. She closed the door, leaned against the wall, and let her breath escape in a slow exhale. Her reflection in the dark glass showed a cadet covered in bruises, but her eyes glowed with a heat no one could see. That night, she trained harder than ever. She struck the practice dummy until her knuckles split open, blood staining the padding. She whispered to herself, not words of anger, but steady reminders. "Endure. Watch. Wait." But fate never waits forever. The next morning, during another drill, everything changed. It was supposed to be a standard sparring exercise. Cadets paired off, weapons activated, strikes controlled. The human cadet was once again matched with one of her tormentors, the same predator-born cadet who had humiliated her before. From the start, he attacked with full force, ignoring the rules. His blade slashed dangerously close, his strikes loud with aggression. The others circled around, cheering him on. "Break her this time. Make her bleed." She blocked, stepped back, and blocked again. Sweat dripped down her face, her arms trembling from the strength of his blows. The circle of cadets shouted louder, laughing at every stumble. Then he struck her across the face with the hilt of his blade. She fell to the ground, the metal taste of blood filling her mouth. The hall exploded with laughter. "Too weak. She should leave the academy. Humans are nothing but prey animals." The predator cadet bent down, grabbed the edge of her collar, and hissed into her ear. "Earth is a joke, and so are you." That was the moment. The words pierced deeper than the strike. The laughter pressed against her chest like a storm breaking through. She had endured every insult, every shove, every humiliation. She had carried silence like a shield. But this time the silence cracked. Her fingers closed around his wrist with sudden strength. Her head lifted, eyes blazing with a rage that froze him mid-sneer. The hall grew quiet. The laughter died instantly. For the first time, she spoke. Her voice was low, sharp, and heavy. "Do not mock Earth again." The predator tried to laugh, but the sound caught in his throat. The others shifted uncomfortably, sensing something had changed. The old instructor, standing at the edge of the hall, narrowed his eyes. He had seen this look before on human soldiers just before the impossible happened. The storm was no longer waiting. The storm was coming. The training hall was loud with the echo of boots, clashing weapons, and voices filled with arrogance. Cadets from predator races flexed their muscles and boasted of their victories. But in the center of the arena, silence pressed like a storm about to break. The human cadet stood there, her uniform torn at the shoulder, her lips still bleeding from the last blow. The predator-born cadet grinned, circling her with slow steps, confident that the crowd was his shield. His horns gleamed under the lights, his blade heavy with energy. "You think you can stand here with warriors?" He sneered, voice dripping with scorn. "You're prey, nothing more." The words struck deeper than the blade ever could. For weeks she had endured. For weeks she had swallowed every insult. But something inside her chest, that fire she had carried in silence, finally reached its limit. Her grip tightened on the blade in her hand. Her shoulders squared. For the first time, her head lifted fully. Her eyes locked on his, cold, unflinching, dangerous. The crowd noticed the shift. Laughter faded into murmurs. Something about her silence no longer looked weak. It looked sharp like the edge of a weapon. The predator lunged, swinging his blade in a wide arc. Everyone expected her to stumble again, to block clumsily. Instead, she moved with speed that none had seen before. She stepped aside, the strike slicing through empty air. In the same motion, she slammed the hilt of her weapon into his ribs. The sound of impact echoed through the hall like thunder. The predator staggered back, gasping, eyes wide in disbelief. The cadets around them froze. And then she moved again. With fluid speed, she closed the gap, her blade striking once, twice, 3 times. Each strike was precise, controlled, but filled with raw force. The predator tried to fight back, but his movements were slow, heavy, predictable. She had studied him for weeks. She knew exactly where his weaknesses lay. He swung down hard, but she ducked, spun, and drove her fist into his jaw. The crack of impact silenced the hall completely. The predator fell to the ground, his blade clattering beside him. He tried to rise, but her boot pressed against his chest, pinning him down. For the first time since she arrived, she spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Humans are not prey." Her voice was steady, cold, final. The hall was dead silent. Cadets who had laughed at her for weeks now stared as if seeing her for the first time. The predator under her boot gasped, stunned and broken. But she didn't stop there. Another cadet, One of the bullies who had cheered the loudest shouted from the edge of the circle. She cheated. That was luck. He rushed forward, blade raised. The human cadet's eyes shifted, calm and sharp. She sidestepped his charge, grabbed his arm, and used his own momentum to flip him hard onto the ground. The breath whooshed from his lungs as he hit the floor, groaning in shock. Gasps rippled through the hall. A third cadet, larger than the others, stomped forward, growling, "I'll crush you myself." He swung a massive punch meant to knock her down, but she caught his wrist mid-swing. Muscles strained, but her grip held firm. She twisted sharply, forcing him to his knees with a cry of pain. In one swift motion, she slammed her elbow into his face, sending him sprawling across the arena floor. Now the silence was not just shock. It was fear. The cadets who had mocked her stood frozen, their arrogance melting into dread. They had seen her stumble, fall, bleed, but they had never seen this. This was not weakness. This was controlled rage unleashed. The old instructor at the edge of the hall leaned forward, his scarred face unreadable. But deep in his eyes, there was no surprise, only recognition. He had seen this before, on battlefields where humans turned hopeless fights into victories, on worlds where survival meant silence first and then fire. He muttered softly, "The storm has arrived." The human cadet released the third opponent, letting his body collapse onto the floor. She turned slowly, scanning the circle of cadets. No one moved. No one laughed. Every eye followed her as if she were no longer the weakest among them, but something far more dangerous. Her chest rose and fell with steady breaths. Her grip on the blade was relaxed, not desperate. She did not scream. She did not roar. She stood in silence, but that silence was heavier than thunder. Finally, she lowered her weapon, her voice cutting through the hall like steel. "Mock me again, and you will join them." No one dared to answer. The predator-born cadet still on the ground groaned, clutching his ribs. Others helped him up, but their hands shook. For the first time, they saw her not as prey, but as something they could not define. The lesson was clear. Silence was never weakness. Silence was the warning before the strike. The silence in the training hall did not last long. Word of what had happened spread across the academy like fire through dry fields. The quiet human cadet, once a shadow no one noticed, had dropped 3 apex warriors in one session. By the next day, the story was everywhere. Some cadets whispered in disbelief. Others laughed nervously, calling it a fluke. But the ones who had been there the night before knew it was no accident. They had seen the look in her eyes, the fire that had been waiting all along. The instructors scheduled another combat trial, this time with the entire class. It was supposed to be a group sparring exercise, but everyone knew what it would turn into. The predators wanted revenge. The weaker cadets wanted to see if the stories were true. And in the middle of it all stood the human cadet, silent as always, her gaze steady. The arena was vast this time, shaped like a circle with high walls and energy barriers. Dozens of cadets lined up with their weapons ready. The predator-born cadets cracked their knuckles and grinned, determined to prove that what happened yesterday had been nothing more than luck. One of them snarled, "You will not humiliate us again, human." Another added, "This time we finish it." The signal was given. The trial began. They came at her all at once. 3 predators charged from the front, their weapons glowing. She moved faster than their eyes could follow. One ducked low, swinging at her legs. She leapt, twisting midair, and slammed her heel into his chest, sending him flying backward. Before the others could react, she landed and drove her blade into the second's armor, shattering it in one strike. The third tried to grab her, but she spun and elbowed him in the throat, dropping him to his knees. The crowd gasped. More cadets joined the assault, trying to overwhelm her with sheer numbers. Blades flashed, claws swung, energy bolts filled the air. She wove through them like water, every movement sharp and precise. A strike to the ribs, a kick to the knee, a punch to the jaw, each one landed with brutal accuracy. The floor shook with the impact of falling bodies. A predator twice her size roared, charging like a beast. He raised his massive hammer high above his head. She waited, calm, still. At the last moment, she sidestepped, grabbed his arm, and used his own momentum to throw him across the arena. He slammed into the wall, stunned. Gasps and whispers echoed from the sidelines. She's destroying them. No, she's studying them. Every move is planned. She's not fighting with rage. She's fighting with control. But inside her, rage did burn. It was just focused, sharpened into a weapon that could not be stopped. Another cadet lunged from behind, claws extended. Without turning, she ducked low and swept his legs from under him. As he fell, she grabbed his wrist, twisted, and forced him into the ground with a crack that made everyone flinch. One by one, the so-called apex warriors fell. The arena floor was littered with groaning bodies, some clutching their ribs, others too stunned to rise. The predators who had mocked her most stood frozen now, their weapons trembling in their hands. They had called her prey, a weakling, a coward. But here she was, standing tall while their strongest lay broken around her. The last of them, a horned cadet with sharp fangs, screamed in fury and charged. He swung wildly, desperate to land a single blow. She blocked every strike with effortless precision. Then, with one final move, she slammed her fist into his chest, sending him crashing flat on his back. Silence fell across the arena. The human cadet stood in the center, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Sweat ran down her face, but her eyes were calm, sharp, unbroken. She looked around at the class. Dozens of warriors from predator species, all lying defeated on the floor. Not a single one had survived her storm. She lowered her blade slowly, her voice cutting through the silence like steel. "This is your lesson," she said. "Mock humans, and you will remember this day." The cadets stared at her with wide eyes. Fear replaced laughter. Respect replaced insults. The predators who had once treated her as bait now lowered their heads, unable to meet her gaze. On the sidelines, the old instructor stood with his arms crossed. His scarred face carried no smile, but in his eyes, there was a glint of pride. "They pushed her too far," he whispered. "And now they will never forget what a human becomes when silence ends." For the rest of the class, the trial was over. But for the galaxy, the story had only just begun. The quiet cadet, once nothing but a shadow, had unleashed the storm, and no apex warrior had survived it. The academy was never quiet. Normally, its halls shook with laughter, boasting, and the sound of warriors testing their strength. But after the storm in the arena, silence followed the human cadet wherever she walked. No one laughed when she passed now. No one shoved her or whispered mockery behind her back. Instead, eyes turned quickly away, as if even staring at her too long might draw danger. She walked through the corridors with the same calm steps as before, her head lowered, her voice silent. But now that silence carried weight. The same cadets who had once mocked her avoided her shadow. Even the predator-born warriors, who never bowed to anyone, shifted aside to give her space. Her dormitory, once filled with chants of her weakness, was now quiet at night. Cadets who used to shout insults at her door now stayed silent. When she entered the cafeteria, the tables that once shoved her tray away now left room for her. Some cadets even offered her a seat, but she always sat alone. She had not asked for fear. She had not asked for respect. But both had come. Whispers still followed her, but they were different now. She crushed them all. Not one apex warrior could stop her. Silence is more terrifying than rage. The academy had seen hundreds of warriors rise, but none had seen someone like her. A cadet who had endured every humiliation, only to unleash fury that none could survive. Even the instructors spoke differently. Some admired her, nodding as she passed. Others looked uneasy, questioning if they had made a mistake letting her train here. The old instructor, the scarred veteran, said nothing. But in his eyes, he knew what the others feared. This was only the beginning. Training drills resumed as normal, but nothing was the same. When sparring partners were assigned, no cadet wanted to face her. Some pretended to be injured, others tried to switch partners. Finally, the instructors had to order volunteers to step up against her. Even then, those who faced her never struck with full force. They blocked, they circled, but they never attacked with the cruelty they once used. One predator cadet, who had mocked her the loudest weeks ago, stood frozen in front of her during a duel. His blade shook in his hands. He swung half-heartedly, as if afraid of what her retaliation might be. She disarmed him in 3 moves, calm and precise, then stepped back. "You're free to attack," she said softly. But he dropped his blade and walked away, eyes downcast. The crowd watching whispered louder. "She doesn't even need to fight anymore. They're already broken." Her silence had once been weakness. Now it was fear itself. But for the human cadet, nothing inside her had changed. She still trained alone at night. She still sat quietly in the cafeteria. She still said little during drills. The only difference was that the fire inside her no longer burned unseen. It was written in the way cadets stepped aside when she entered. It was written in the trembling of their hands when they held weapons near her. And yet, some began to wonder. If this was her strength now, what would happen in real war? If she could crush apex warriors in training, what would she do to enemies on the battlefield? The question spread beyond the academy. Visitors and dignitaries whispered about the silent human. Reports reached other worlds. Some laughed nervously, dismissing it as exaggeration. But others grew cautious. If one human cadet could do this, what would an army of humans become? One evening, as she left the training hall, she noticed the way cadets stood in small groups, whispering as she passed. Their words carried fear, but also something else, respect. Not the respect that was given freely, but the respect that was forced from the heart after witnessing something unforgettable. The predator-born cadets, once the loudest voices of mockery, now avoided her gaze. Some saluted her quietly when she walked by. Others clenched their fists, angry but too afraid to act. They had been humiliated not just by defeat, but by the memory of their own laughter turning to silence. The old instructor watched it all. He knew this was not just about one cadet. This was about a message to the entire galaxy. Humanity, often mocked as fragile, carried storms within them. Silence was their warning. Rage was their answer. That night, the cadet returned to her dormitory. She sat on her bunk, staring out the window at the stars. The academy was silent around her. For the first time, no insults echoed in her ears. No laughter followed her into the dark. But in her chest, the fire still lived. She knew this was not the end. This was only the beginning, because silence had turned to fear, and fear always spreads. The galaxy had begun to awaken to a new truth. They would never mock her kind the same way again. The Interstellar Academy had seen thousands of cadets pass through its gates. Warriors from predator worlds, champions of ancient clans, and heirs to proud empires had all trained there. But no one remembered their names. They remembered hers. The silent human. What began as whispers inside the academy soon spread like an echo across the stars. At first, it was just a story among cadets. How a quiet human had endured endless mockery, only to rise and crush every apex warrior in her class. But stories travel fast, and this one traveled faster than most. By the end of the month, merchants on trade routes told it in taverns. Soldiers on distant fronts repeated it to new recruits. On predator worlds, parents used her name as a warning. Do not underestimate the quiet ones. They may be human. The academy itself could not hide the truth. Records were stored in the archives, combat trials, sparring matches, performance scores. Again and again, her name appeared beside victory. Instructors gave their reports. Precise, relentless, silent. One line was repeated often. No apex warrior survived the class. For the cadets who had once mocked her, the lesson was burned into memory. Some carried the scars of her strikes on their bodies. Others carried the heavier scars of fear, the memory of her eyes, calm and unflinching, as she dropped them one by one. None of them mocked her anymore. Even years later, when they returned to their home worlds, they carried the story with them. It spread in council halls, in military briefings, in whispered warnings. Silence is dangerous. Do not provoke humans. Do not mock what you do not understand. The human cadet herself never sought fame. She continued training, her routine unchanged. She still ate alone. She still trained at night. She still spoke little. When others looked at her now, it was not with laughter but with caution. Some dared to respect her openly. Others kept their distance. But she did not care. She had never fought for their respect. She had never fought for pride. She had fought because silence can only hold so much, and because her world's name had been insulted. That was all. The old instructor, the scarred veteran, understood this better than anyone. When asked about her, he simply said, "They mocked her silence, and they learned too late that silence is not weakness, it is warning." His words were written in the Academy's records, preserved for future generations. Years later, new cadets arrived at the Academy, fresh and eager. They laughed and boasted, as young warriors always do. But among them, whispers moved like shadows. "Have you heard of the silent human?" Some doubted the tale. Others dismissed it as exaggeration. But then they saw the old scars on the training grounds, the archived records, the quiet nods from instructors. Slowly, the story became less of a rumor and more of a law. Never mock the silent ones. And for humanity, the legend became a shield. Where once humans were dismissed as fragile, now they were seen with new caution. Alien leaders spoke carefully when Earth's name was mentioned. Predators who once called them prey now remembered the cadet who had shattered that word. The galaxy had learned something that could not be forgotten. Humans may endure quietly, but when their patience ends, they strike with storms. The cadet herself stood one last time in the arena before graduation. She looked at the high walls, the glowing barriers, the floor where her silence had turned into fire. The arena was empty now, but she could almost hear the echoes, the laughter, the jeers, and then the silence that followed her first strike. She touched the hilt of her blade, her reflection glimmering in the polished metal. She did not smile, but her eyes carried a calm certainty. History would not remember her name, but it would remember the lesson. The archives recorded it in one line, repeated across generations.